It's the kind of night that cracks open your heart, leaving you exposed, unsure of where you are or who you've become. Samantha's heart races, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of the truth she's been trying to bury. Her once perfect life, her marriage to Dave, has shattered into pieces too painful to comprehend. She stumbles through the door, her mind clouded by the events that changed everything. A night that began as just another evening in her routine now feels like the final act in a story she never saw coming. But as the seconds tick by, Samantha is about to realize that there's no going back. What happened tonight will haunt them both forever, and the truth is far more devastating than she could ever imagine. Samantha and Dave were the definition of soulmates. High school sweethearts, they grew up together, their lives intertwined by shared dreams and countless memories. Dave, dependable and steady, was always there for Samantha, providing the emotional support she needed as she climbed the ladder of her ambitious career. Samantha, driven and passionate, loved Dave for his calm demeanor, his unwavering belief in her, and the sense of stability he brought to her fast-paced world. Together, they built a life filled with laughter, adventure, and love. They shared everything, both the big moments and the small, quiet ones, believing that nothing could ever come between them. They had a trust that felt unbreakable, a connection that was supposed to last forever. But as time passed, their bond began to shift. Samantha's career soared, while Dave, ever the reliable husband, began to feel like an afterthought. Though they still shared a life together, something unspoken began to change, and in the quiet corners of their home, the cracks began to form. Samantha's success at work was a dream come true, but it came at a cost. Her days grew longer, her business trips more frequent, and her focus shifted away from the life she and Dave had built together. What started as a few late nights soon became a permanent fixture in their marriage. Dave, ever the understanding husband, assured himself that this was just a phase, a necessary sacrifice for her career. He told himself he'd be patient, that she'd come back to him when things settled down. But each time Samantha returned home, it was as if a part of her had stayed behind. She became less communicative, less present. Conversations felt strained. Her smiles no longer reached her eyes. Dave began to feel the familiar sting of neglect, but he buried his concerns, thinking that perhaps he was being too sensitive. Still, the distance grew, and no matter how much he tried to close the gap, it only seemed to widen. A whisper of doubt turned into a roar, but he didn't know how to confront the changes that were unraveling their once perfect marriage. It was another late night, and Dave sat on the couch, the ticking of the clock louder than the silence between them. He had expected Samantha to be home hours ago after her work event, but as the minutes dragged on, his unease grew. When the door finally creaked open, he noticed the smell of alcohol before he saw her. Samantha was stumbling, her words slurred, and her laughter seemed too loud, too forced. Dave's heart sank as he watched her try to steady herself, but the warmth and affection he was used to seeing in her eyes were gone. In their place was a cloudiness, a distant look that he couldn't quite place. She barely acknowledged him as she kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto the couch. A chill swept through him as he realized something was terribly wrong. But instead of confronting her, Dave kept quiet, hoping this was just a passing moment of weakness. His gut, however, was screaming that this wasn't the same woman he married. The questions swirled in his mind, but he stayed silent, unwilling to face the truth that was creeping closer with every passing second. The night was supposed to be a fresh start, a quiet New Year's Eve spent with the woman he loved. Dave had planned a cozy evening for just the two of them, complete with homemade dinner and their favorite movies. It was his way of re-establishing the connection they had lost. But as the day wore on, Samantha informed him that she had to attend a last-minute work event hosted by her boss, Mark.
A wave of unease washed over Dave, but he masked it with a forced smile, telling her to go and enjoy herself. The old feeling of uncertainty gnawed at him. Mark had always been a bit too friendly, a bit too interested in Samantha's career, and Dave couldn't help but wonder if there was more to it. He pushed those thoughts aside, determined to trust his wife and let her have this evening. But something deep inside him knew that this night, of all nights, would be different. He couldn't shake the feeling that this New Year's Eve would change everything between them forever.
The night wore on, and Dave tried to keep himself occupied, but his mind kept drifting back to Samantha. Then, just as the clock was ticking toward midnight, his phone buzzed. It was a text from her. "Leaving the party now. Mark's giving me a ride home." The words hit him like a cold wave. Mark was driving her home? At this late hour? He felt a pit form in his stomach as he read the message over and over. He tried to ignore the panic creeping up on him, telling himself it was nothing. But the unease wouldn't go away. His mind spun with questions. Why had she mentioned Mark? Why hadn't she called him herself? Why didn't she just take a cab? Dave's gut twisted, his heart racing as he waited. The seconds seemed to drag, and the knots in his stomach tightened. Something wasn't right, but he stayed still, telling himself to trust her, even though every instinct screamed otherwise. The clock ticked on, but in that moment, everything felt off. Something had shifted, something he couldn't ignore anymore.